What does a man remember when he has already lived through everything the game could offer? Is it the victories people still talk about, or the moments no one ever noticed? Is it the sound of the crowd on a Sunday afternoon, or the silence that follows a handshake that didn't feel right? When you think of Tiger Woods, you think of control, the red shirt, the steady walk, the kind of focus that made the entire course feel quieter just because he was on it. He never gave much away, not in interviews, not in defeat, not even in victory. But that doesn't mean nothing stayed with him. There was a moment, not one of the famous ones, just a small exchange after a round. Cameras were already turning away. The crowd had started to thin out. It should have been nothing. A few words, a quick handshake, a look that lasted less than a second. And yet, something changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, just a shift. The kind of shift you only notice much later, when two people who once stood side by side begin to stand a little further apart, then further still, until one day there is no space left to close. No argument, no public fallout, no explanation anyone could point to, just distance. That became a pattern around him. There were comments that sounded harmless, until you understood the tone behind them. There were moments that passed quickly, but never really disappeared. And there were names that never quite returned to where they once were, not because of what happened in front of the cameras, but because of what didn't. These were not always his toughest opponents, not always the loudest voices, not even the most obvious rivalries, but they left something behind, something that didn't fade. And over time, those moments began to form a list. The 5 men he could never fully forgive. The game he stepped into was already old, quiet, structured, guarded in ways that were never written down but always understood. And then Tiger Woods arrived, and something shifted. Not all at once, not loudly, but steadily enough that everyone felt it. He did not just win, he changed the rhythm of the game. Courses that were once played with patience suddenly felt too small. Tournaments that used to unfold slowly now bent around his presence. It was not only the distance he hit the ball, it was the way he carried himself between shots. There was no excess, no wasted movement, no visible doubt, just a kind of stillness that made everything around him feel unsettled. Players noticed it first, then the media, then the people who had spent their entire lives inside the traditions of the sport. They did not always say it out loud, but they felt it. Tiger was not just another champion. He was something the game had not fully prepared for. And with that came distance. He was respected, but rarely approached. Admired, but not easily understood. Even in moments of celebration, there was a separation that never quite disappeared. He did not build his career on connection. He built it on control. Control of his swing, control of his emotions, control of what the world was allowed to see. And that control came at a cost. Because in a world built on quiet conversations, shared rounds, and unspoken alliances, even the smallest fracture could grow without being repaired. A comment that went too far. A tone that felt slightly off. A moment that should have passed, but didn't. For most players, those things fade. For Tiger, they stayed. Not as noise, not as conflict, but as memory. And over time, those memories found their place, not in headlines, but in the way certain names never quite came back the same. Number 5, Fuzzy Zoeller. It began at a moment that should have felt like a beginning. Augusta, 1997. A young man walking into history, not just winning a tournament, but changing the shape of it. The crowd did not fully understand what they were witnessing yet, but they felt it. Everyone did. And then, almost as quickly as that moment was sealed, something else followed. Not on the course, not during the round. After. In a comment that sounded casual enough to pass for humor, Fuzzy Zoeller spoke about what the new champion might serve at the Masters dinner. Fried chicken, collard greens, words delivered with a smile that did not quite hide what sat underneath. It was the kind of moment that some people tried to brush aside. A joke. Poorly chosen, nothing more. But for Tiger, it was not about whether it was meant lightly. It was about what it revealed. Because this was not just any setting. This was the most traditional stage in golf. A place where history mattered, where belonging mattered, where every detail carried weight. And in that space, a line had been crossed. There was no public confrontation, no sharp response, no visible shift that cameras could capture. Just silence. Zoeller apologized later, publicly. Clearly, the story moved on for most people. But not everything moves on the same way for everyone. For Tiger, this was not a rivalry. There was no competition between them that would define careers or championships. It was something quieter. A realization that, even at the highest point of arrival, there were still parts of the room that did not fully accept him. And once that realization settles in, it does not leave easily. From that point forward, the distance was set. Not dramatic, not loud. Just permanent. Number 4, Sergio Garcia. Some rivalries begin with respect. This one never quite did. When Sergio Garcia first emerged, he was seen as something different, young, emotional, expressive in a way that stood in sharp contrast to the stillness of Tiger Woods. Where Tiger moved through the course like a metronome, Garcia played with visible frustration, visible energy, visible reaction. At first, that contrast made the rivalry compelling, but over time, it started to wear thin. Garcia spoke openly about his struggles against Tiger, not just about losing, but about feeling overwhelmed by him. At one point, he admitted he was hopeless when playing alongside Tiger. It sounded honest, but it also carried something else beneath it, a kind of irritation that never fully disappeared. The tension was never built on one single moment. It accumulated, missed opportunities, public comments, the constant comparison that always seemed to tilt in one direction. And then years later came the moment that changed everything. At a public event, Garcia made a remark about serving fried chicken if he were to invite Tiger over for dinner. The room reacted instantly, laughter from some, discomfort from others. The kind of moment that reveals itself before anyone has time to correct it. This time it did not stay quiet. Tiger responded, calmly, directly, calling the comment hurtful. Garcia apologized, publicly, repeatedly. But something had already settled into place. Because this was not just another competitive jab, not another comment made in frustration after a loss. It crossed into something else. And for someone like Tiger, that line matters. From that point on, whatever rivalry once existed lost its foundation. There were no more layers to explore, no respect left to balance the tension. Just distance. Not loud, not dramatic. Final. Number 3, Vijay Singh. Some tensions never announce themselves. They do not arrive with a moment that everyone remembers. No single quote, no single incident that defines the fracture. They exist in the space between two people who never quite align. Vijay Singh was one of the very few players who could stand in the same era as Tiger Woods and not disappear. Week after week, season after season, his name stayed close. Not louder, not bigger, but present. And in a time when most of the field was trying to survive Tiger, Singh was competing with him. That alone created a different kind of tension. Because this was not about personality, not about media comments, not about public perception. It was about proximity. Two players moving through the same tournaments, the same leaderboards, the same conversations about who truly defined that period. But even then, something felt distant. Singh was never part of Tiger's world, not in the way others tried to be. There were no shared moments that softened the rivalry, no visible connection that suggested anything beyond competition. Just two paths running parallel. And then came a moment that did not explode, but lingered. The controversy surrounding deer antler spray. Questions about substances, about rules, about what should and should not be allowed inside a sport that still held tightly to its traditions. Singh addressed it. The story moved through the media. Eventually, it faded. But for someone like Tiger, things do not simply fade. There was no public condemnation, no strong statement, no visible reaction that could be replayed or quoted. Just something quieter. A line that had been drawn and not crossed again. Because in a game built on precision, trust carries its own weight. And once that trust feels uncertain, even slightly, it does not need to be discussed. It just changes the way one player looks at another. From that point on, whatever existed between them remained exactly where it had always been. At a distance, cold, controlled, unspoken, and permanent. Number 2, Phil Mickelson. Some rivalries are built on moments. This one was built on years. From the outside, it looked perfect for the game. Two of the most gifted players of their generation. One precise, controlled, almost unreadable. The other instinctive, creative, willing to take risks others would never consider. They were placed side by side, again and again. Same tournaments, same conversations, same expectations. But something never aligned. Phil Mickelson was open with the crowd. He smiled. He engaged. He let people in. There was a warmth to the way he moved through the game. Tiger Woods did the opposite. He kept everything contained. That contrast should have balanced them. Instead, it created distance. They were not enemies. There were no public clashes that defined their relationship, no single moment where everything broke apart. It was quieter than that. Ryder Cup made it visible. Placed on the same team, expected to work together, expected to represent something larger than themselves. On paper, it made sense. On the course, it didn't. The chemistry never formed. The rhythm never matched. It felt like two players walking the same fairway but playing two different games. People noticed. Not in dramatic ways. Not in headlines that demanded attention, but in the small things. Body language. Silence between shots. The absence of any real connection. And then came the words. Years later, Phil Mickelson spoke about leadership, about how teams function, about what they needed. He never attacked directly. He didn't have to. The meaning was clear enough. For most rivalries, that might have led to a response, a correction, a public exchange. But Tiger did what he always did. Nothing. No reaction. No explanation. No attempt to reshape the narrative. Just a shift. Because for someone who builds everything on control, trust is not given lightly. And once it starts to fade, it does not return easily. Over time, the relationship changed. It softened at the surface. There were moments of mutual respect, even shared victories later on. But underneath, something had already settled. They were never truly close, never fully aligned, and never completely comfortable with each other. Not because of one moment, but because of everything that never quite connected. Number 1. Hank Haney. Not every fracture comes from competition. Some of them begin with trust. When Hank Haney entered the picture, it was not as a rival, not as a voice from the outside, but as someone allowed in. Closer than most, closer than almost anyone. This was not a public relationship. It existed in practice ranges, in quiet adjustments in hours that never made it to television. The kind of work that shapes a career without ever needing to be seen. And for a period of time, it worked. Tiger trusted him, not in the way people talk about friendship, but in the way a player trusts someone with the smallest details, the things that can't be explained easily, the things that require silence more than words. That kind of access is rare, and it does not come back once it is gone. When they eventually separated, it did not feel dramatic. No headlines that demanded attention. No visible conflict that suggested anything had broken. Just another quiet shift. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. Then came the book. Haney wrote about his time with Tiger. Not just the golf, not just the mechanics or the tournaments. Personal details. Conversations. Moments that had never been meant for anyone else. It was not loud, not explosive in the way scandals usually are, but it crossed a different kind of line. Because this was not about rivalry. It was about privacy. For someone who built his entire career on controlling what the world could see, this was something else entirely. Tiger did not respond with anger. He did not argue. He did not defend himself in public. He did not try to reshape the story. He did what he always does. He stepped away. Completely. No reconciliation. No visible attempt to repair what had been broken. Just distance. That never closed. Because when trust is given at that level, it is not meant to be shared. And once it is, there is nothing left to rebuild. Among all the names that passed through his career, this one was different. Not because of what happened on the course, but because of what happened off it. And in a life defined by control, that may have been the one thing he could never fully accept. There is a difference between anger and distance. Most people think they are the same. They expect conflict to be loud, visible, something that can be pointed to, replayed, explained. But with Tiger Woods, it was never like that. He did not argue his way through tension. He did not explain what he felt. He did not give people the closure they might have expected. He simply adjusted. A step back here. A silence where there used to be a word. A presence that no longer stayed as long as it once did. And over time, those small adjustments became something permanent. Each name carried a different story. A comment that revealed more than it should have. A rivalry that never found balance. A trust that was broken in a way that could not be repaired. None of them looked the same on the surface, but they all led to the same place. Distance. Not as punishment, not as reaction, but as a decision, because for someone who lived his entire career under a spotlight that never dimmed, control was not just a strength, it was protection. He chose what to show, he chose what to keep, and when necessary, he chose who no longer belonged in that space. That is the part of his story that numbers cannot explain. Not the victories, not the records, not the moments that filled stadiums with noise, but the quiet way he moved through everything that followed. There are players who leave a mark with what they achieve, and then there are players who leave a mark with what they refuse to carry forward. Tiger did both, and in the end, the most revealing part was never who stood beside him in the light. It was who quietly disappeared from it.